What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, September 5th, 2017, getting into the week here after the Labor Day holiday. And, of course, Claire and I had a little bit of an extended vacation, and it was really nice to kind of get away from all this politics, even just for a few days, and catch up on all the little things I needed to repair around the house, and sort of empty up the honey-do list and catch up on paperwork and everything like that. Of course, then North Korea had to go and spoil it all right in the middle of our vacation by setting off an H-bomb, the little prick. And so we're staying on top of that situation as well. But it was good to get away, and Claire and I really did need the rest. We were kind of on the edge of a fry out there. But we're back here and ready to go, tanned, rested, and ready, and ready to get back on into things. We've got phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, we're dealing, obviously, with the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey. It is a mess over there. And the only good thing that can be said about it, it was obviously a horrible and tragic event. But the one thing that came out of it that I think is really working in our favor are all these photographs of these people in Texas helping each other out without regard to skin color, without regard to gender, orientation, religion, or anything. Just everybody working together, because Americans, when dealing with adversity, have a tendency to pull together as one American people. And this totally undermines that whole Antifa, Black Lives Matter agenda of trying to make it look like we've got a racial crisis in this country, because we really don't. It's a made-up piece of propaganda to try and control us, to try and divide us against each other. And as the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey showed, no, we're not as easy to divide as you might think that we are. Now, again, getting on back to the aftermath, the Texas gas shortage may become a real gas crisis. They're trying to get those refineries and pipelines back online, but it is a very stressful situation. There were lines at the gas pumps out here in Hawaii. Everybody was stocking up in advance of the gas prices going up. They haven't yet, but everybody was sort of doing that as well. The Federal Trade Commission is warning that apparently robocall scammers are already targeting Hurricane Harvey victims. And talk about a cold and cynical thing to be doing. And you have to wonder what kind of human beings are going to take advantage of a disaster and these people suffering to try and grab more money away from them. And apparently, okay, it looks like our BAM user may not be working correctly. Imagine my surprise on that one here. So you have to wonder what kind of a lowlife during an epic disaster like this, and all these people are suffering. They've lost their homes, they've lost pretty much everything, and still they're going to go on out there and try and make a fast buck off of them. That really is disgusting. And I guess there's something about a disaster that brings out both the best and the worst in people, and we've been seeing a lot of the best, all these people working to help each other, the Cajun Navy and so forth, and then it brings out the worst, which are the scammers who are out there trying to say, oh, how I can make money off of these poor people, you know, and all the rest of it. Now, good news, the evacuation around Artemis, Texas chemical plant has now been lifted. And apparently the materials that they were concerned might explode were actually destroyed in a controlled burn. And because of that, they've now lifted the evacuation. People can start moving back into that area. And as if they didn't have enough trouble, now, of course, we have Hurricane Irma to worry about. It is now a Category 5 storm. It's one of the worst hurricanes to come out of the Atlantic in decades. And right now, the projected course track is aimed at the southern tip of Florida. And there's still some variations about where it might go. Some people are saying it might actually go on up the east coast of Florida. Others are saying it's just going to sail right across Florida and once again into that whole Texas, Louisiana area. And as a result, Florida has already declared a state of emergency. The hurricane is aiming on in there, the concern that it could actually hit Miami head on. It could actually cause a huge amount of damage to the Kennedy Space Flight Center, that vehicle assembly building. is designed to take a certain amount of wind, but I think if it took a full-on hurricane, that might actually see that as potentially collapsing. This is a nasty storm. There's no getting away from it. And apparently over in the Virgin Islands, they have authorized the National Guard to start seizing guns and ammunition ahead of Hurricane Irma. I guess they're concerned about looters or civil unrest. And so they're really getting nervous about that over there. Now, everybody is still out trying to take advantage of the hurricane for whatever their agenda is. The global warming people are out there saying, oh, see, it proves global warming, which it doesn't. And this is really kind of weird. I saw this tweet, and it's Brianna Danielle is with Bonnie Bregodi. So they say Hurricane Irma is headed for Miami. Did y'all realize 70% of Miami is Latino, Hispanic, or Cuban? 44% of the Haitian population in the U.S. resides in Miami. Miami is like Houston, in which it is flourishing economically. Coincident. Trump wants them off our land, so what better way than to flood them out? Read between the lines, people. So here you have somebody who's actually trying to say that Donald Trump has whipped up Hurricane Irma and he's sending it into Florida to get rid of certain ethnic groups. I mean, that is really, really out there. Over on the corporate media, on MSNBC, their terrorism analyst Malcolm Nance is wringing his hands and bemoaning the fact, saying if there weren't the hurricanes, we'd be talking Trump impeachment this week. Those hurricanes, they just got in the way of our agenda to get rid of Donald Trump here. Now, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. We're talking about Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and if you're in that Florida area, the prepper panic buying has already started. The stores are running out of stuff. And so you need to start making your preparations right now and keeping an eye on that course track. And I noticed that the National Weather Service servers are just jammed with everybody getting constant updates of where Irma is going. And as if that was not bad enough, there's another tropical storm, Jose, forming right behind Hurricane Irma. Its current course track is a little south, more toward the Caribbean. But again, days ahead, you don't know which way it can go. Those poor people, it's just one hit after the other. And apparently there is a tropical depression forming right now in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. And they're saying that that's a 70% chance of turning into a tropical cyclone. So, man, they're just getting pounded over there. And interestingly enough, over in Santa Barbara, where there was no indication that there was going to be any kind of excess weather, they had this weird hurricane-level storm that just hit Santa Barbara out of nowhere. Now, there's storm clouds over there. You can look at the weather satellite photos. But apparently this storm just blew in off the coast, overturning boats, flooding roadways, knocking power lines down. And everybody's trying to figure out just where this came from, because there was no hurricane, there was no eye. The weather forecasters are saying that it may have been a very, very large microburst, which is a localized and powerful sudden downdraft. But they're not really sure, but it caused a lot of damage there. And as if we didn't have enough from all these storms here, the wildfires out across the west and Southern California are just out of control. And just looking at the photos, they've got the largest wildfire in Los Angeles history, is forcing hundreds of people to evacuate. The fire is getting close to Burbank. When Claire and I lived in Southern California, we saw a lot of these fires. I remember one time when there was this huge fire in Malibu, and I was working in Hollywood, downtown, and we came out late one night, and just the whole western horizon was all on fire. And I remember another time when I was working as a magician at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and all of a sudden these wildfires cropped up, literally 3 of them, surrounding the park, and they gave the order to evacuate the guests. They gave them all rain checks. And because we were all part of the entertainment staff, we were given the task of helping shepherd people, make sure that nobody stayed behind, and, you know, just encourage them to get on out. It's for your safety. And after they were all gone, it was this very weird thing where all the lights are still on and everything's still moving, but there's nobody there, and the sky was just this incredible orange. It's like out of some kind of a Twilight Zone episode. And it was just this weirdest thing here. But you need to look at those photos. It is very intense. Now, where is that coming from? Well, you need to understand that in the rush to fund all these wars, budgets have been cut in certain other services, such as maintaining the fire break roads through those Angeles Crest Mountains. And if you've ever been up in Angeles Crest, you're driving along the paved roadway, and you'll see these dirt roads just going off left and right. And they're not marked. And all they are, they're the fire breaks. They're supposed to contain fire into an area. Those have been neglected. And that's why these fires are able to just spread as far as they are, because they're leaping over what's left of those fire breaks, which are now overgrown with brush. Up in Montana, they've got blazes all across the state, and apparently they're running out of money up there to fight the fire here. And here's where the bureaucratic mentality really comes on in here. There is a company here in the United States of America. We know that Russia has got these amazing firefighting tankers, which are not being allowed in because we're not friends with the Russian. But there's this company, Global Super Tanker. They turned a 747-400 series passenger jet. It's one of the biggest 747s there are, into the world's largest fire extinguisher. And this thing can drop twice as much fire retardant as the Russian air tanker. And apparently it is sitting idle in an airport hangar in California because the U.S. Forest Service will not approve it for use over these wildfires. Now, this thing has passed FAA certification. It's already had a test flight. They had it out in Colorado running a test. This can lay a line of retardant about 3 kilometers long in a single swipe. They need this thing in the air. And frankly, if I were Donald Trump, I would issue an executive order to the U.S. Forest Service. You get this thing up in the air and you start using it right now. That is just insane to have a powerful firefighting system like that just sitting on the ground. Now, getting onto the domestic politics, as you know, more and more information is surfacing about how former FBI Director James Comey was literally protecting Hillary, literally wrote the justification for exonerating her even before the evidence, even before she testified. It was a done deal going on in, and apparently, according to a story over in Zero Hedge, more information is coming on out saying that it was not Comey's decision to exonerate Hillary. It came all the way down from Barack Obama himself. The fix was in from all the way up in the White House. That's obstruction of justice right there. Remember, everybody wants to protect that narcocracy, that rotted core at the heart of the U.S. federal government, because when that comes on out, it's all going to fall apart. The American people will not obey a government that is itself the largest drug smuggler in the entire country. Now, Judicial Watch has filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice on behalf of retired Special Agent Jeffrey Danick, seeking records related to roughly $700,000 in political contributions made by groups tied to Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, who's a longtime Clinton confidant, goes all the way back to the Arkansas days. And the donations were made to the wife of FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, the same McCabe who was conveniently overseeing multiple Hillary Clinton investigations at the time and even oversaw components of her email investigation. It's just one huge corrupted mess. And Judicial Watch is normally very cool, very professional, but even they're beginning to start to let the anger come on out, saying, yes, the federal government is protecting Hillary Clinton. Well, again, they're not protecting just Hillary Clinton. They're protecting that Clinton-Bush CIA cartel and all that drug money. By the way, ever since those classified emails emerged, nobody's seen Huma Abedin. And apparently she's still been on Hillary's payroll long after the campaign was over. A lot of people are saying, given that Huma wasn't doing anything for that money, that it appears to be hush payments. And now she seems to have vanished from the public eye, as it were. Maybe she's over playing canasta with Brian Pagliano wherever he is right now. Now, getting on to the domestic violence scene where you have Antifa and Black Lives Matter, there is a retired Major General, Marine Corps Major General Jeffrey B. Higginbotham, and he's out there saying, stop pretending that you're some kind of a social movement. If you're being paid $25 an hour to show up to a rally and cause violence, you're not a protester, you're a mercenary. You're just a hired thug out there being paid to cause trouble for somebody else's political gain here. Now, the good news is the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have now officially classified Antifa activities as domestic terrorist violence. Long, long overdue, and probably at least partly in response to that White House petition that was saying Antifa needs to be declared as a terrorist group. Now, they haven't declared them as terrorist groups. They're simply saying their activities constitute domestic terrorist violence. Getting back to that whole thing about the Confederacy, the Southern Poverty Law Center is now claiming Army bases are Confederate monuments and should be shut down. Now, I'm actually in agreement that we've got way too many Army bases all over this country and all around the world. But the idea that they're Confederate monuments and need to be shut down is really over the top. Now, Southern Poverty Law Center is coming under severe criticism because they collect a huge amount of money. They spend very little on legal actions, even though, as you can tell from their name, they're supposed to be fighting legal actions against hatred and bigotry. That's what their charter says that they're doing. And now apparently they're moving a lot of their money offshore. And people are wondering what's getting ready to happen there. Now, getting on back to North Korea, the numbers were kind of all over the place here. But one thing is certain, this nuclear test, their 6th nuclear test, was a much larger event than the one from 2016 or before. And we're seeing the American experts on the American media are saying basically it was only 6 kilotons. Sputnik News has experts saying it was 70 kilotons. Word is that the North Koreans were expecting it to be somewhere around 100 kilotons, which is getting into some serious weaponry. But something is not adding up here because the seismographs detected a 6.3 tremor associated with the detonation of this bomb. And there is a mathematical table called the Kelly Kiloton Index, which maps kiloton yield of a nuclear weapon with the Richter tremor that it can be expected to produce. And a Richter 6 quake indicates a yield close to a megaton. So that was a big bomb. Now, about 8 minutes after that detonation, there was another event. Nobody knows what it was. It was much smaller. Maybe it was a collapse in the tunnel or a real quake triggered by the detonation. But it was a big bomb. And, of course, the news coming out of North Korea is this H-bomb is able to be mated to a missile and deployed. I'm not sure I'm buying that one. They've shown Kim Jong-un with this nicely polished metal assembly that looks like a 2-stage nuclear weapon, primary and secondary. And again, this is coming out of my movie experience. It doesn't look real. It looks like it's a mock-up or a model. And I'm not buying that it's real. And that's just my opinion, and I would hate to be proven wrong on that. But it just doesn't feel like it's a real warhead or a real nuclear weapon here. Now, obviously of concern is the fact that North Korea is now moving a new ICBM into position for a test launch. They're going to be using one of their platforms on the western part of Korea for this next one, which means they're expecting it to have a huge range. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we've got a lot of people out there talking tough about this confrontation between the United States and North Korea, and maybe that's where the hurricanes are coming from. You got Trump over here throwing his hot air, and Kim Jong-un over there throwing his hot air, and maybe that's what's causing all these storms out there. But the reality is neither leader really seems to be thinking things all the way through in terms of the ramifications of the actions that they're taking. Now, one problem, we're already sitting on a nation that is looking at a serious oil and gas shortfall because of Hurricane Harvey, and it's probably going to be made worse by Hurricane Irma, possibly even worse by Hurricane Jose. And a war with North Korea could send oil prices skyrocketing because a conflict would cripple North Asia's production and refining capacity. It would just disrupt the entire region. Pipelines would get shut down, refineries would get shut down. They're not really thinking about that. Now, Japan is preparing to evacuate 60,000 of their citizens from North Korea who are either living there or visiting there. They want to get them out of the way if things really start going south, which it almost seems inevitable at this point. Meanwhile, both China and Russia are still expressing their dismay at the emplacement of the United States terminal high-altitude area defense missile systems in South Korea. And Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon of China said that South Korea should offer sincere explanations to China about its decision to host the U.S. THAAD missile system because Beijing sees it as a threat to its national security. Now remember, when President Moon Jae-in was first sworn into office, he said he wanted those things to go. And every time the U.S. planted another one in there, he said, I really don't want these active. And apparently Moon Jae-in is as controlled by his generals as Donald Trump is. And that is a very, very dangerous situation because generals love war. It means more money, more promotion, more ribbons and everything. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov is saying Moscow would need to react to the expansion of the U.S. anti-missile defense system in South Korea. It inevitably will raise the question about our reaction, about our military balances. Ryabkov told reporters at a BRICS summit in China. In other words, Russia is signaling they're going to put more missiles down along that part of the border. By the way, have you noticed something odd? There's something missing. I think it was like about 4 missile tests ago, Japan and the United States said they would shoot down further North Korean test firings. It hasn't happened. Instead, what we've gotten is the United States staging a test where they launch a missile from here in Hawaii and they shoot it down with a THAAD somewhere over Alaska. But those tests can be rigged. You can put a homing beacon on the target. They have not gone after any of these North Korean test missiles. And it kind of makes you wonder if maybe THAAD is as defective and or ineffective as so many of the other modern U.S. weapons. And it certainly makes it look like they're afraid to actually try here. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dustin, are you there? Hello, Dustin. I'm not hearing you. Okay, we'll put Dustin back on hold because we're coming up on a commercial break anyway, and we'll take Dustin after we come back from the next commercial. Now, South Korea is proposing a full oil and currency blockade of the North. China is saying no. There's nothing that they can do to North Korea economically that is not going to have repercussions throughout the region, especially when you have Donald Trump out there talking about sanctioning anybody who does business with North Korea. And again, it's a case of not thinking it all the way through because the United States is economically dependent on China. Where do you think all those products in the big box stores are coming from? If Donald Trump places sanctions on China, we could see a major economic disruption in this country that could cause a huge amount of problems. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I think we finally have Dustin in New Jersey on the line here. Dustin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you?
Doing fine.
Hey, Mike, I know I don't, all these experts on TV, they always quote, no, they have this, they have that. They might have a megaton. They might have a couple, 100, maybe 100 kiloton. But all that matters is they have one, and that's giving everybody pause to say, hey, let's negotiate with North Korea, because that's the thing about North Korea. They're unpredictable in terms of what they have and what they don't have, and that's what gives the U.S. pause, because if you're wrong and they have 20 or 30, it's game on, and that's the thing about North Korea. They basically have us in that space where we don't know for sure what they have and what they don't. You know what I mean?
Well, prior to the treaties between the United States and the Soviet Union, that was part of the game of deterrence. You don't know how many bombs we've got. You don't know how far they can reach. And keeping that element of doubt was a big part of that whole deterrent process. Now, I think North Korea, the smart thing to do would be to bring them into the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and simply say, okay, you've got bombs, and, we're going to inspect them and count them, and we'll know what you've really got. But the bottom line here is that North Korea is responding to this history of belligerence by the United States over the last several years, and these constant drills that are being held off their coast by South Korea and the United States. They're reacting out of fear because they remember how much they suffered during the start of the Korean War.
And remember, this is not just the United States. This is the West. Britain, France, Germany, this is the deterrent, It ain't going to happen like Iraq, Libya, and almost Syria. Everybody knows what the game is now. To have nuclear weapons, that's that'll give you pause. And it has given us pause this long already. Remember, Trump said he was sending an armada, and it was found out going the other way at that one, the first time. Remember, they're not going to attack North Korea. They're not going to do it because, like I said, they don't know for sure what they got or what they don't got. So all this is just like bluster by that crazy Nikki Haley. I don't know why he picked that woman anyway. She seems like a ditz.
She is. Her job is to go up there to the United Nations and just push for war on everybody. But what North Korea is trying to do is to reach a position of having a credible deterrent. They've just established that they have a very powerful nuclear bomb. Whether or not it will really go on a rocket yet or not, I don't know, but it's only a matter of time before it does. Now they're getting ready to test another one of their ICBMs to establish the credible deterrent that they can loft something explosive over large distances of the planet, and that's the whole thing. North Korea isn't going to attack anybody. Any more than Iraq was going to attack anybody or Iran was going to attack anybody. They're trying to create a credible deterrent to tell the United States, leave us alone.
Remember when they had all those commercials on the news about duck and cover? Not in the 50s, but remember they redid that for in Hawaii, and stuff, and that dissipated. I'm more worried about Irma coming up the East Coast, Mike. I'm not worried about North Korea, because they've, the game that Washington and the West uses. I'm more worried about the people in Texas and what's going to happen in Florida, because Florida's going to get hit, and I don't know if New Jersey's going to get hit if it goes up the East Coast, since I'm in New Jersey, but I'm more worried about that than a threat from North Korea. Just like I wasn't threatened by Saddam Hussein. We always find a threat, even if it's on the planet Venus. Just elements of our government. Everybody's a threat, but them.
Yeah, I understand that, but here's the problem. We do know that North Korea does have nuclear weapons, and you've got the U.S. pouring nuclear weapons in there. South Korea is now saying they want to bring back the U.S. tactical nukes. They want to start building their own nuclear weapons, and you get a whole bunch of nuclear weapons in that part of the world and a bunch of very nervous people with their fingers on that button. The possibility of a mistake where somebody launches, that's what we have to be afraid of. I don't think anybody's going to initiate a nuclear attack, but something could happen. We could have an asteroid fall out of the sky, like the one that came down over Russia a few years ago. Horrendous explosion. Somebody panics and says it's a nuclear attack, and they launch the weapons.
Hey, Mike, I want to switch gears back to Texas. Hey, what do you think about all these people looting now? And a lot of people putting out signs, we're going to shoot, and and it's go to California or something like that. They want to take everybody's guns away, even in this country. I'm like, well, what are you going to do? Throw a wet pair of socks at the intruder?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of why we need the Second Amendment. Common sense says that when the organized society, the first responders, the police can't get around there, that you should have the means to defend your home against the looters. And by the way, I'm all in favor of shooting the looters. Again, you have to wonder what kind of lowlifes are willing to take advantage of a natural disaster and the suffering of all these people to go on out and help themselves to a new TV set.
What kind of lowlives would arm jihadi terrorists to blow up women and children and old people in Syria?
Yeah,
same kind, Mike.
Yeah, same kind. You got exactly the same thing. One of the problems that they're having down there in Texas and Louisiana is apparently the looters are dressing up to look like Department of Homeland Security or FEMA, and they're going up to houses and saying, you have to evacuate. The whole neighborhood's being evacuated, and everybody will panic. Oh, we got to get out of here. There's chemicals, something. And they leave, and the looters just walk right in and help themselves to everything that they've got. And
then one more thing, Mike. Congratulations to the Syrian Army in Deir ez-Zor.
Oh, absolutely.
And the Russian Air Force did a great job.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to get to that. All right, we're going to switch over to Terry in Oregon. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
Okay, yeah, no, some guy sent me a picture this morning of a guy with buckshot hole in his back. I don't know if you saw that. He was a looter down in Texas. But anyway, the reason I called is, the military-industrial complex loved the Korean standoff between North and South Korea. And I think what they want to do is just move it up to China, take over the North. And they've got all these pre-positioned reserves in South Korea behind them to be able to help with that. And I think the reason why they want to do that, another reason is that China just invited 5 more countries in to participate in the Silk Road.
Yes.
Which I think we should be doing. And the bankers panicked because they don't want to split it with anything. They want to control the whole pie. So it's a standoff between the East and the West, and looks like the East is winning. And that's why they want to go into Korea, and threaten them and maybe shut down that Silk Road, which we should be participant in again. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, China is moving away from the dollar. They're now trading their oil for a special yuan, which is backed by gold. And that, of course, is a major body check against the ink and paper stuff coming out of the Federal Reserve. So ultimately, what this next world war is all about is the U.S. Federal Reserve note versus the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan.
Exactly. That's the point I wanted to make, Mike. Appreciate it, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jason in Quincy, Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How are you? A lot's on my mind. I'm sure a lot is on your mind as well, correct?
Absolutely.
So that being said, no, I get it. So that being said, I just purchased a Coca-Cola with my fake Federal Reserve notes. So what? Now do I owe the Federal Reserve $1.79 because every note is a debt note, correct?
That's absolutely correct, but it's not the value, it's not the face value of the debt note that's the trap. It's the fact that while those notes are in circulation outside the Federal Reserve, they are accruing interest to that Federal Reserve. That is the hidden hook in the Federal Reserve system.
What a joke and how disgusting, right? So if I'm allowed the time to make 3 points, my second point would be, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? I'm 33 years old. I'm a pretty smart person. I run a business. How the hell are we going to kick out the foreign banks? Is it going to necessarily be an entire overhaul of our entire financial system?
Well, we're going to have to sit back and let it collapse, and it's on the verge of doing that. I mean, look at the stock market today. They took a major.
It's going to collapse on its own.
Yeah, it's going to collapse on its own. And again, I do not advocate violence of any kind toward the government or toward the banks. If anything, it would justify more draconian repressive measures on their part. We just sit back, stay calm, have some pretzels and a soft drink, and we just watch them finish destroying themselves. But we have to be ready when that happens to stand up and say, we will decide on the new economy and the new government, and we're going to go back to the Constitution and the first 13 amendments, and we're going to say no more private central banks ever, 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 ever. And somebody comes on in and says, let's start a new private central bank. We give them a good thick coat of tar and feathers, and we run them out of town on a rail, preferably redwood. They leave really nasty, deep splinters.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to give them a big tar and feathered middle finger, and I'm going to tell them, international bankers, you can go to hell. Frankly,
it's not who owns the bank. It is the system of the bank itself. It's not an honest monetary system. It doesn't really matter who owns the bank as long as it's being run as an honest bank with a value-based currency. But when you allow any bank, whether it's owned, some of the owners of the Federal Reserve are Americans. Okay, but when you allow a private central bank to create currency out of thin air and loan it into circulation at interest, it is not economics, it is enslavement.
Economic enslavement is the term. And I was going to make a third point, but I'll...
Yeah, Jason, your phone is kind of weird. We're going to let you go here. Thanks for the call, and switch over to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned about people taking advantage, and I have no empathy for looters, and it kind of reminds me of there's a woman, I think it was out in California, that actually shaved her daughter's head and passed it off that she had cancer and drew lots of money in before they found out she was a fraud. But I had a little I got some eyebrows raised yesterday when I did some business at the local Walmart here, where they're asking for a donation for Hurricane Harvey after you complete your transaction. And I said, well, which organization? She said Red Cross. I said, not interested. And she looked at me kind of funny, like, why? And I told her why, that they're one of the worst as far as the money actually making to the cause. I suggested other agencies that were much, much better, like Salvation Army. And she looked at me like she didn't even give a darn, really. But it is very important, if people are going to contribute money, to make sure they give it to a credible agency and somebody with a high reliability that's going to get the money to the cause and not be used up in bureaucratic causes or whatever.
Well, one of the best. Over the holiday, I was looking at these various national charities and how much they take in versus how much actually goes for the charity, and the best one seems to be Salvation Army, where they're really out there, and so anything that we're giving, actually we donated through Claire's Church, and because they're running their own program. But yeah, Salvation Army. If you want to write a check to a charity, send it to Salvation Army, because most of that money will wind up going down and helping these poor people. And again, Hurricane Harvey, still cleaning up from that. Irma coming in, Jose coming in, another one forming in the western part of the Gulf of Mexico. Those poor people can probably be forgiven for feeling like they're being picked on just a little bit.
Right. No, I agree. Another one to add to that list, and that's probably not all across the country. I know it's in Utah, and I think Idaho, is Deseret Industries, which is run by the Mormon Church. They do a fabulous job. I've worked with them before, and as far as their Haiti program, sending medical supplies and equipment out to Haiti, and I think they're a very, very reliable source on top of the Salvation Army. So, people, if you're going to donate money or write a check, make sure you get to the right agency where the money's going to do some good. That's it.
Absolutely. By the way, isn't it weird we haven't heard the Clinton Foundation out there advertising for donations for the hurricane area? Maybe they're finally hanging their heads in shame and hiding in the shadows out there. All right, Steve, thanks an awful lot for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to Korea. Again, everybody's looking at the economic repercussions here. And the reality is Trump is talking about sanctioning China because they do business with North Korea. Trump is out there saying we're going to sanction everybody who does business with North Korea. That's a lot of countries. And the problem is this idea of stopping all trade with China would be a major shock to our economy because we buy a lot of their manufactured goods because we don't make our own products anymore. If those sanctions go through, those stores over at the big box, those shelves over at the big box stores, they're all going to be empty. You know, all the toasters and TVs and everything else, they're going to be gone. The shelves will be empty there. And a lot of people are very, very concerned. In fact, Julian Assange came on out and said that if Trump blocks trade with China over North Korea, Trump will be, quote, deposed immediately, end quote. Now, I don't know how that might be done and why Julian Assange seems to think he's in a position to know, but it would be a very, very serious matter. And it's another reminder that the people who are pushing the war agenda never think beyond the war itself, which unfortunately is a feature common to all wars throughout history. We're just going to do what we need to do to win now, and to heck with what's going to happen 5-10 years down the road. It's not my problems. Meanwhile, Russian President Putin is saying that imposing sanctions on North Korea or all these other countries is useless and ineffective, and saying that this hysteria being fanned up by the United States is leading to a global catastrophe. Now, you need to understand something. North Korea is not a wealthy nation. They really don't have money to put into missiles and nuclear weapons. So if they're doing it, it's because they feel there is a real need. So everybody is concerned that this could spin out of control if they start firing missiles at each other. And apparently, according to a story out of Novanight.com, apparently, Trump had a conversation with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and discussed using nuclear weapons against North Korea. Well, why not? The United States is the only country that's ever actually used nuclear weapons against another country, as Abe definitely would know. We need to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, global support for U.S. belligerence against North Korea is not there. Theresa May is absolutely refusing to back Donald Trump's threat of war against North Korea, saying that it is the United Kingdom's overwhelming preference for a peaceful and diplomatic solution. And the Prime Minister's spokesperson said, we're not going to get behind the Defense Secretary's demands for a massively military response on North Korea. They don't want to get into there. They've had enough of getting tangled up in all of America's wars. They're still stuck in Afghanistan. They're stuck in Iraq. They're stuck in Syria. They're stuck in Yemen, Somalia, all these places all over the world. And they're getting tired of it. Now, North Korea is basically out there saying that the U.S. is the heinous aggressor who's begging for war. And they're absolutely right about that. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The new South Korean government, Moon Jae-in, has announced plans to extend economic ties with Russia, China, and Mongolia. So they, too, are pivoting away from the U.S.-centric system. And a lot of the imports into this country, especially electronics and appliances, come from South Korea. They're also a manufacturing powerhouse. South Korean media is calling for the country to build their own nuclear weapons. They want a deterrent independent of the United States. And South Korea's defense minister is suggesting in the interim bringing back tactical U.S. nuclear weapons. And analysts are saying this would sharply increase the risk of an accidental conflict. And one of the things most Americans don't understand is how many near misses there have already been with nuclear weapons. Now, we all know about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close it came to turning the keys then. But there have been several cases where, because of technical problems or other issues, people have been on the verge of launching a nuclear attack, and probably one of the better-known ones for those of us paying attention. Remember the movie War Games, Matthew Broderick? A kid hacks into Cheyenne Mountain and plays a game with an artificially intelligent system and almost tricks the United States into going to war against Russia. John Badham based that on a true incident. Now, in the real incident, there was no outside kid, there was no outside hacker. Somebody in Cheyenne Mountain put a training tape on the computers without announcing it was a training session. And all of a sudden, everybody's computers lit up with all these signatures of missiles coming across the North Pole from Russia toward us, and they came dangerously close to launching before somebody said, hey, there's something wrong with this. And there have been probably at least a dozen of these. So it is something that you have to take into factor when you look at this thing. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're getting word now that evacuation orders are already being issued for the Florida Keys. The Keys emergency manager is saying everybody needs to get out. Tourists, residents, nobody can afford to stay. So they are really very, very concerned. And they're on top of the situation. Now, getting on back to North Korea, or actually South Korea, and why Moon Jae-in is straining at the leash. 6 decades after the ceasefire of the 1950 Korean War, South Korea's 650,000-man active armed forces and 4.2 million-man reserves remain under the command of a U.S. 4-star general. This is sort of a neo-colonial arrangement. It was supposed to have ended years ago, but somehow or other, successive governments of South Korea has gone along and said, yes, we're going to leave our military, the South Korean military, under U.S. control. Now, getting on over to Syria, as a caller mentioned earlier, Dustin, the Syrian army officially breaks the ISIS siege on Deir ez-Zor. They're rolling on in there. The siege has been lifted, in part thanks to Russian aviation and a cruise missile strike. And basically, this amounts to the strategic defeat of Islamic State in Syria. Now, I'm sure the United States is going to say, yes, we got rid of the terrorists, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but guess what? Assad is still in power. He's not going anywhere. So the reality is, this is a major defeat for the United States foreign policy. Meanwhile, we're seeing this story coming out of geopolitics that Saudi Arabia and Israel still need to airlift 300 stranded ISIS terrorists out of Syria and take them someplace else, probably down to the Philippines or Afghanistan or wherever they need to plant them to justify further military action. I know they're going to take them over to North Korea. Oh my goodness, there's ISIS in North Korea. Of course, we have to invade immediately. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's take a phone call. Sherry in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. If I'm not mistaken, East Texas, when Harvey came in, they were scrambling to pick that cotton. The West Texas crops had pretty much been picked already. Someone mentioned this. It might have been, just General News or something that was on Republic Broadcasting Network, but East Texas, they were just frantically trying to bring in that cotton. So I'm thinking this. We've got gas prices going up. Food, of course, will go up. Cotton. And I'm like you. I like to go to thrifts to get things to work in. When I used to paint, I got a lot of towels to clean my brushes with. There's a lot that you can find at thrifts. And then maybe this isn't important to some people, but things like work jackets, blankets, sweatshirts, underwear, and socks might be a good time to stock up on that. Towels, old towels, just for cleaning. And what about paper goods? If there's going to be a lot of these storms and everything, it might be good to stock up on them. It's just a lot. I think they're gonna hit us in the pocketbook really badly.
Well, there's already been a lot of talk about gouging, but there is a line. Gouging is when they're just running the prices up, and the costs to them have not yet gone up. But inevitably, there's going to be a cascade event. If there's a gas shortage, then anything that is dependent on gas for its manufacture or transportation, inevitably that cost will go up as well. And so there's going to be a ripple effect. We're going to see prices going up all across the country. And again, if Irma comes on in and it skips over Florida and gets back into that Louisiana area again, that's going to be a major disruption of shipping. I still have not heard anybody has done a survey of the oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico to see how many survived Hurricane Harvey. So I don't think anybody really still knows the true scale of the economic consequences from this storm.
I know. Yeah, and that worries me, too, that they haven't been forthcoming with that kind of information, because it's like I'm waiting for it, and they're not. We don't know the shape it's in. But don't discount the thrifts if you want a lot of blankets and stuff. You can always give them to more needy if you're not hit hard,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Just thought I'd throw that in.
All right. Well, thank you very much here, and we're going to let you go. Getting on back to the news here. Apparently, there's been a NATO airstrike in eastern Afghanistan. They hit a wedding. NATO bombed a wedding, killed 2 civilians. Are these guys not checking their targets? That is really tacky to bomb somebody's wedding here. Apparently down in Cambodia, their opposition leader has been formally charged with treason for allegedly working with the United States government to topple Cambodia's government. See, more and more of these countries are getting wise to how the United States has been doing what they've been doing ever since the end of World War II. Now, Israel is down there making like they're going to start a major kerfuffle. They're preparing for another war with Hezbollah as the IDF practices a Lebanon invasion. And the war is not really about Hezbollah. Israel still wants that Litani River. They want to prove that they're butch and they're going to take over Lebanon. And, of course, Nikki Haley, in an op-ed in the Jerusalem Post, is saying it's time to confront Hezbollah. Okay, Nikki, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, here's your Dayglow orange jumpsuit. And, again, that seems to be her job, is to run around just fanning the flames of war wherever she can. Now, there is a discussion coming up in the Security Council regarding what is called the UNIFIL mandate. Now, UNIFIL was supposed to be an interim force inside Lebanon, just temporary, but apparently it's actually been there for quite some time, and it was supposed to be an interim force. It's been there for 40 years. Russia has already announced that if the UNIFIL mandate mentions Hezbollah, they will veto. Now, as you know, last week, Netanyahu was rushing all over the place, screaming at everybody about Iran is doing this, Iran is doing that, so forth and so on, running up to Putin and screaming at him. And one of the things that Netanyahu claimed was that Iran was building factories to produce missiles in Syria and Lebanon. And, of course, over in Lebanon, Hariri is rejecting it outright, saying that Israel is carrying out a deception campaign. Of course, that's what Israel does. By way of deception, thou shalt do war. That's what they like to do. Netanyahu is demanding that Russia break with Iran. There's no chance of that actually happening. But Israel is facing an uncomfortable truth. It's having to adapt to a shrinking role in the Middle East. And they don't like that one tiny bit. And apparently when Netanyahu went up to Russia, witnesses were saying he seemed almost panic-stricken about trying to sell his agenda to Putin. And it was highly emotional and panic. And basically what it all comes down to, Israel, meaning Netanyahu, now understands it backed the wrong side in Syria and it has lost. They backed the side of the terrorists, of those who wanted to remove Assad, and they have lost. We're going to take a phone call from Ralph in California. Aloha, Ralph. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? Just yesterday, I don't know if you reported it because I've been in and out, so I haven't heard your show since the beginning today, about the gold-backed yuan and the oil purchasing oil with that with other countries. And if so, how long do you think it's going to take effect before we really hit this hard? Your opinion.
I would imagine the effect is going to be almost immediate because of these hurricanes. The U.S. domestically is looking at a shortfall. They're going to actually have to import more oil than they normally do. And if they can get it from the Middle East in exchange for paper dollars, that will be fine. But right now, the rest of the world, if they wanted to just all of a sudden say, you got to pay for the oil with hard currency, something with actual value to it, the United States would be in a really, really bad place.
Well, yeah, because what it's saying is a lot of countries are not ready. What they like about what China's proposing is they're not necessarily have to buy the oil in yuan. They can convert that to gold, so they're more favorable of that at this time. That's what I'm getting from the reports.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah. So from that, yeah, and then plus what we're experiencing now in Texas, and then who knows what happens in Florida, but with the oil, because we had a refinery shut down over there, correct, in Texas?
It was shut down. I think it should be reopening like tomorrow or the day after, unless Hurricane Irma comes on in and shuts it down again.
Oh, okay. So we'll be able to produce oil there, but otherwise the currency...
We can produce it, but the other problem is they've had to shut down some of the pipelines. And the pipelines have become flooded with contaminated water. They're going to have to clean those pipelines out before they can put them back in service.
Yeah, we're going to have some delays, and we're going to have some shortages, because basically this is pretty much putting the dollar out of the global currency.
Well, that's the whole point here. I mean, the entire world has been slave to the U.S. dollar since the end of World War II and Bretton Woods, and between the Nixon shock and various other machinations, the petrodollar, the rest of the world has come to understand that the dollar as the global banking and reserve currency is basically the way the United States collects its imperial tax on the rest of the planet.
Correct. All right. Yeah, just get your opinion and words on it. That's basically what I called. But thank you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
The last caller just stole my thunder. I was going to talk about the same thing. But I'd like to expand on that a little.
Okay.
What would China would want no trade with us if that's done, right? Like why would they want to trade with the U.S. once that's complete?
Well, I think they would still want to trade with the U.S. because if we're a major importer of their manufactured goods, and they can still bring those Federal Reserve notes back to the United States and demand something in exchange for them. Whether it's agricultural, well, no, they don't want our agriculture. China bans GMOs. Basically, they've been accepting the Federal Reserve notes. At some point, they're going to want to trade those in for something of tangible value.
Yeah, because you think about it, just about all shelves in the stores are stocked with Chinese products.
Yeah.
And, all we have to offer them is paper money that's worthless.
Yeah, boy. Am I glad we updated our iPhones here, because they're made in China. There may be a shortage of those things.
Yeah, can't you see that happening? I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
If they were to say, I don't want your worthless money, then all of a sudden, all our shelves are going to go empty. I mean, because who's going to want to trade with us at that point?
Yeah, we're running out of things to trade with. I mean, what has propped up the U.S. financial system is this scam of the whole world being forced to use the U.S. dollar for cross-border trade and banking. And more countries are just abandoning that. They're moving away from it. And the first few countries to try, of course, were subject to military intervention. But if everybody does it all at once, there's nothing the United States government can do about it.
Yeah, I could see it becoming a domino effect eventually. And if that's not a warning to people to at least make sure you have things in order, extra toilet paper, some food, you never know. You just never know. We could be a shortage of a lot of goods that we're so used to having.
Absolutely. There may well be shortages. We need to see what's going to happen with Irma and Jose and whatever they're going to call this one in the Western Gulf. Yeah, we could see major supply chain disruptions on the continental United States.
That's a scary thought.
Yes.
All right, Michael. I just want to expand on it.
All right.
Thanks for everything.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call. Now, as you know, the United Nations Human Rights Council has announced they're going to publish a list of companies that do business with Israeli settlements built on stolen Palestinian land. And the United States and Israel are threatening to withhold their funding to the United Nations if this list is published, because obviously it would be fodder for the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, which is attempting to pressure Israel economically into complying with the international law. Israel does not have a right to just go into Palestine, grab swatches of land, and start building settlements there. They never have. And every time you point that out, they scream, "Oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, you want Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens," which is not really an argument. Now, another reason Netanyahu may be in a bit of a panic is this submarine scandal is starting to spread in Israel. And apparently this multi-million-dollar purchase of naval vessels from Germany, which is known as Case 3000, has taken a dramatic twist. A former Israel minister and the former deputy head national security advisor, Avriel Bar Yosef, has been questioned in connection with alleged financial irregularities. And apparently a political media advisor of a sitting minister is also being interrogated. So there is a huge, huge stink there over this submarine deal. And Netanyahu is in the crosshairs. And Netanyahu may be getting ready to start a war with Lebanon as a distraction or to hang on to power. He may be thinking that, well, if I can get a real bloody war going with Lebanon, then the government won't dare replace me because we'll be in the middle of a war, and you don't replace your leadership in the middle of a war. Now, a UN official has addressed the Saudis saying it's time to stop the war in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia should fund 100% of the humanitarian aid to correct all the problems they have brought to Yemen, the starvation from the blockade, the bombings, and all the rest of it. Claire put up an article earlier today where she had a comment about King Salman over in Saudi Arabia can add another title to himself, the Butcher of Yemen. That's absolutely right. Now, Nikki Haley, in a speech at the American Enterprise Institute think tank in Washington, D.C., basically came on out and said Trump has grounds to declare Iran in violation of the nuclear deal. No, he doesn't. The IAEA has gone on in and certified that Iran is fully in compliance with the requirements of the P5+1 agreement. Nikki Haley and all these other people who lust for war in Iran, like John McCain, their entire argument is that Iran is not happy about the agreement. They're not complying with the spirit of the agreement. They should open up all their non-nuclear military facilities for immediate inspection. And, of course, Iran's not going to do that, and they're not obligated to do that under the agreement. But we have this insane image of the U.S. government provoking a war with North Korea and with Iran to go along with this long list of quagmires we are already stuck in. Meanwhile, Washington is looking for an escalation in the diplomatic standoff with Russia. And they're just seizing these compounds. Apparently, Moscow is furious over the U.S. plan to search the Russian trade mission, calls it an unprecedented aggressive action. And it is, because the rules of diplomacy are, when you have a consulate, an embassy, a trade mission, that is sovereign soil of that country. The Russian embassy is sovereign Russian soil. You don't just walk on in with the police and start going through the drawers, and yet that's exactly what the U.S. is getting ready to do. It is a horrible, horrible diplomatic insult. I think they're trying to goad Putin into doing something. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I want to get back to Hurricane Irma. Apparently, it's a Category 4. It's already a Category 4. It is so powerful, it's actually starting to register on seismographs, which normally detect earthquakes. And apparently the Florida governor has already activated the National Guard as Irma approaches. So they're expecting this to be a real nasty one, and good that they're on top of it. But it's going to be intense. I've been through 2 hurricanes in my life. One when I was very young, living in New Hampshire. We had the eye go right over us. And then I went through another one out on Kauai some years ago. So they're really, really nasty. They're really, really nasty. Okay, getting on back to the news here, talking about what's going on with this tit-for-tat diplomatic row with Russia. And Russia's responding to this U.S. searches of diplomatic property, which is an incredible diplomatic faux pas. You just don't do that. And Russia is basically describing it as illegal, meaningless clownery. And they are illegal under international law. And they're saying basically this kind of thuggish behavior, this bullying, this is from Russia Insider, it's a sign of weakness, not strength. And yeah, we know that's true. Behind a bully, there's a coward who's trying to cover that up. First time the bully gets a bloody nose, they stop being a bully. Putin's even trying to make light of the whole situation, saying it's difficult to have a dialogue with people who confuse Austria and Australia, apparently responding to a little slip-up by one of the many spokespersons who are out there. We have been talking about the deplorable state of America's military. The latest weapons. They're junk. F-22 still asphyxiating its pilots at high altitude. F-35, huge laundry list of problems they still have not fixed. The Gerald R. Ford, full of all this new high-tech whiz-bang, and now they're saying maybe they made a mistake trying to put all this new stuff in one hull, that it may never actually be an effective combat platform. We have the Zumwalt stealth destroyer, drivetrain problems. And now we're seeing this article coming out of apparently the Navy is now admitting the littoral combat ship is a disaster. And they're talking about the design concept was this sort of Swiss Army knife of multiple missions. And the littoral combat ship was envisioned as a ship that could embark and deliver special operation forces close to shore on one mission, change the mission module. Little drop-in things, then begun hunting for mines or submarines next time out of port. And apparently the mission modules have never worked as expected. And we know that both the Freedom-class littoral combat ships and the Independence-class littoral combat ships have multiple issues with the engines and drivetrain, including one incident where the USS Milwaukee broke down at sea less than a month after being commissioned and had to be towed back to port. Serious hull corrosion issues. So the Navy came on out and said, all right, so that didn't work. We have an idea for a new ship. We're going to have a new ship that will replace the littoral combat ships. The littoral combat ships have not even been used for anything other than testing. And they're already out there saying, well, we got a new idea. We'll make this one work. Honest, we really, really will. Turning to the economic news, and it is not good. The stock market actually took a little bit of a pummeling today. And the Dow was down 234, NASDAQ down 59, Standard & Poor's down 18. Of the three, the Dow took the biggest loss in a percentage. So they're not able to keep that bubble pumped up. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a couple of alert listeners corrected me on two issues. Irma has reached Category 5. And that's why everybody in Florida is really getting upset. And apparently the U.S. has already gone into Russia's San Francisco consulate. And basically the FBI went on in there searching it all out. So it's a big, ugly stink out there. Getting on back to the economic news, Russia's Sberbank plans to increase gold supplies to China. And they're going to increase it up to 10 to 15 tons in 2018. Meanwhile, China has declared the initial coin offerings for Ethereum and Bitcoin to be illegal, and that, of course, has triggered a crash in both Ethereum and Bitcoin. And basically, China is cracking down on this cryptocurrency. And again, the cryptocurrency, there's really nothing that backs it up. And that's why I'm leery of that. Now, as we've already mentioned, and this is a story out of Blacklisted News, China moves on New World Order, will buy their oil with a gold-backed currency, bypassing the U.S. petrodollar. And it's being described as a global game changer. And yes, it is. This may well be the beginning of the end of U.S. economic domination of the world. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just about evacuation issues for Florida, for Irma. You know, it's good that they're telling people to get out of the Keys, but Florida presents some special considerations in terms of timing and challenges for evacuating. You often hear it referred to as God's waiting room. There are a lot of elderly people down there.
Yes.
Older people. It's a vacation state. There are a lot of RVs there. There are a lot of nursing homes, retirement communities, things like that. This thing's coming in. If it turns even slightly north, it'll plow right into the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. And those are pretty densely populated. I would think it would behoove them to start evacuating more than just the Keys at this point. You know, basically tell anybody, if you've got an RV and you don't want to be making an insurance claim for it or something, maybe, you know, start getting the Keys emptied, get the RVs heading northward, and then start evacuating a lot of these older people and stuff. Tell them to, get two major north-south highways, one east coast, one west coast, and stuff, and get before it turns into a huge non-moving parking lot traffic jam. Get the people moving out of the more densely populated areas of Fort Lauderdale and Miami Beach now.
I agree. If Claire and I lived in Florida, we'd be hitting the road right now, rather than get caught in those traffic jams. Now, the reason they're doing a mandatory evacuation of the Keys has less to do with the wind from the storm than the storm surge. You need to understand, inside the middle of a hurricane, it's a very low-pressure zone, and it literally sucks the ocean up underneath it. And that's where most of the flooding comes from, is that storm surge. And hopefully Florida has a good set of inundation maps that they can look at. We certainly have them here in Hawaii in the event of tsunamis. But that's the real problem as far as the Keys are concerned. But again, where it comes ashore, that thing, again, the last track I saw, the center of the storm was projected to pass just south of the Keys and head into the Gulf. But again, these track projections past 48 hours, they're really not all that reliable, and they're now actually admitting that, saying we don't know what's going on. But if it were to shift north, you're right, it could hit Miami.
Well, I'd rather see it hit Miami, Fort Lauderdale, because if it goes in the Gulf, all that warm water has been warmer than it used to be ever since the Gulf oil disaster. They sit there and stop, and then we might have a second Katrina going right into it could go right into New Orleans and over into Mississippi, and it could even hit Houston again, depending on where it goes.
Well, again, if it misses the southern tip of Florida, or even if it goes over Florida, we've had hurricanes that could just sail right over Florida and go into the Gulf, and the Gulf is still reeling from Harvey. This is going to be bad, no matter how you look at it. There's no way to put a positive spin on any of this thing. And again, if you are a listener or you have family or friends in these areas, you got to tell them, this is real. This is not a TV movie. It's not Irwin Allen's latest disaster epic. This is for real, and you got to make the appropriate precautions. Look at what happened for Harvey and realize this is going to be more of the same, except that much of the infrastructure is still damaged from Harvey and is going to be less effective at dealing with the flooding.
Yeah. Yep. It'd almost be best if it went straight up the Florida Peninsula in the center up towards Orlando, because it would be slowing down over land the whole time, putting the brakes on a little bit. But it's not likely to do that.
No, then I looked at the spaghetti track where they have all the different models there, and some of them have it turning north, going along the coast, heading up into the Carolinas. Most of them, though, do have it going past or just over the southern tip of Florida and into that Gulf here. And again, could be a last-second change. I remember years ago when we first moved here to Hawaii, and I was working on this movie I was working on, and there was a big hurricane headed right at us. And it was coming on in and coming on in and coming on in, and everybody was shutting down. They shut down the studio, and they said, everybody go home and be safe. And we're on the road and, looking at our cell phone of the weather satellite pictures, and all of a sudden the hurricane just did this right-hand turn and just completely missed us. And we could hope that that's going to happen in this case. But obviously, you don't want to pin your life and your safety, on hoping that it's going to miss you. We've been very lucky here in Hawaii. Of course, we're this little tiny piece of rock. Most of the hurricanes that we get out here just miss us totally. But when you're talking about a hurricane coming out of the Atlantic heading to the west, it's going to hit somewhere, and it's going to cause a lot of hurt. And again, err on the side of caution. Better to have too much than not enough of what you're going to need to get through. Batteries, drinking water especially, because even the drinking water in Texas and Louisiana is still contaminated from Harvey. So I'm hoping that somebody's going to get some water tank trucks down there and allow people to stock up.
Right. Absolutely. This is as you said, this is not a pretty picture. Like almost, could picture it'd be nice if it would go into like the wooded areas of Georgia, something like that. Just miss some population centers somehow, or bounce back out, or whatever. But
maybe it could it could hit CNN.
There you go. That would be redemptive. All right.
Can you imagine the live coverage here? We're looking out the studios at CNN, and here comes the storm. All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the economy, and apparently whoever wrote the headline for this article, this is Investment Watch Blog, it's a South Park fan, because they lead it off with, and it's gone. The pension funding ratio has deteriorated in 43 states. They're not able to deal with the pensions, because the pensions all got defunded back in 2008. They were all told by Wall Street's pet rating agencies, you can invest in these mortgage-backed securities. They are guaranteed AAA, and the pensions invested in them. The whole thing blew up, and the pensions were defunded. The three worst states are New Jersey, Kentucky, and Illinois. And I got to tell you, things are so bad in this country right now. Surveys are now showing 40% of Americans would prefer socialism to capitalism. And I'm not one of them. I'm an old-fashioned capitalist. I'd like to see us get back to being a true capitalist society, as opposed to this fascist society that we're in right now. If I have to pick between socialism and fascism, I'll go with socialism. But I'd rather we go back to being a capitalist society. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Ernest in Nevada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I'd just like to throw in a word about the DACA thing that's going on, that these anchor babies, as we used to call them back in the day.
Yes.
That this is basically, I'd like to find out what they really plan to do it sounds to me like they're going to go ahead and backpedal, and that I don't mind having people that did come illegally, that if they're, like positive, they're not criminals, that if, okay, we're going to give you guys a pass in, but we have to do something so we can't continue to have these things happening. I mean, 5 years from now, they're going to say, well, we're looking at immigration reform. We realistically, we've got 5 million more illegals with more. In other words, they perpetuate the whole thing by not putting that clamp on. We're going to keep us here, but from now on, we're not going to have this problem. We have to take care of it. We're not going to see that, Mike. I think we know that. We've been looking for the last 30 years.
Okay, well, what's going on with the repeal of DACA, it's not the anchor babies, it's the so-called dreamers. These were children who were already born in other countries, and they came on in, and they were given special preference to stay in the United States, and they were given all kinds of subsidies. Some of these dreamer kids were being given scholarships to go to college, while American students are just plunging into debt, and it was seen as basically very unfair by the American people. Why is the government treating these refugees and immigrants, illegal immigrants, better than it treats its own citizens? So there was a lot of upset there. I'm in agreement with you. Okay. If somebody has come to this country and they have proven themselves to be a benefit to our society, there should be a mechanism for them to stay, and there is. It's called the Immigration and Naturalization System. But the problem is the open borders have allowed in all these MS-13 gang members, people carrying all kinds of contagious diseases. They've got a major epidemic out in San Diego right now. And it was a very foolish policy, and it was all done for the globalist New World Order agenda to blend everybody together without a regard for the culture shock, for the medical consequences, for the economic consequences. They just got this dream in their head about one world population all blurred together, and they just went with that and really didn't seem to care about the harm that they're causing ordinary people on the streets.
Mike, have you heard anything online, or do you consider something like this to be maybe too extreme as far as could be reality? Is that the Ernest Rothschild cease and desist order to the keepers of the royal assets? Have you heard anything about that?
I have heard absolutely nothing about that.
Okay, so basically, this could be, just something that's a distraction, something that, but I mean, this kind of leads to a point that I had made before about factions that are in contention in this globalist thing. And you have international factions, and the Rothschilds are the old elite European globalists. And so what this could be, or not, it could be that you have the North American Anglo faction that wants a seat at the head of the table.
Yes.
They don't want to be under this European, right? So this could be maybe some kind of action taken against them, because this is the new American initiative. Is that what you call it? The American
Project for the New American Century was what it was called back in the 1990s.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So to me, that kind of, I've listened to a lot of people, including you, with all your references, and they seem to have this idea that there's like different factions that are competing right now, and they're actually in a kind of a war, but we don't know it. They know it. And you've got like the Eastern Dragon, or basically the Asian power, maybe China is the number one. You've got the European, and now there's North American, which is basically an Anglo-American. It's British that never gave up their claim to to America. That, it was kind of like, we've always been kind of like a partnership, and that someday they want to reclaim the world, or want to conquer the world.
Wait a minute. So, Britain formally acknowledged the independence of the United States in 1793. So basically, any claims they still had over our territory were null and void as of that point. I have absolutely no doubt that the closer they get to establishing a new world order, you're going to see these factions break out saying, we're going to be in charge of it. No, we're going to be in charge of it. And the whole thing could fall apart into...
That's what's happening right now, Mike.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I just, I had a question. what do you think about the Korean thing? Do you actually believe that Korea is every time that they just jump up and do something stupid on demand or command? It almost seems like that. Don't you question that?
No, they're
sometimes?
not doing anything stupid. They're testing their weapons. The United States tests their weapons all the time. On the next island over out that way, we have the Pacific Missile Test Range. They're firing rockets off from that all the time. Nobody makes a big stink about it. They're only making a big stink about it to try and portray North Korea as this, insane aggressor in order to try and sell the American people on the need to revive the Korean War. And the American people really aren't buying it.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it seems like maybe they're just playing a kind of a game in China. It's just kind of like coaching them, and because they're you know what I mean? It just seems to me, I don't know, it just seems weird the way the timing of everything goes.
Well, I don't think there's any timing about it. I mean, obviously, North Korea is pushing an accelerated schedule. Like I said earlier in the show, their goal is to reach a point of showing to the world they have a credible deterrent. Missiles that will hit their targets and nuclear warheads that will fit on them. Once they reach that point, it is going to be very foolish for anybody to try and invade them.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens in the next few months because, it's like they're pushing something. They can't get this going, they're trying something else. And going back to it, something they already tried before. Okay, Mike. Well,
all right. All right, we'll let you go then. Thank you very much here. And I'm going to hold off these next phone calls until after the coming commercial break here because we're almost out of time here. Obamacare is unfortunately still a curse and a blight and a scourge on the land. Next year, 2018, most Americans will face another double-digit increase in their health care premiums. And for all that extra money, they will not be seeing a drop in the deductibles or any other increase in services. It is simply gouging the American people for the benefit of the health insurance corporations that wrote the Affordable Care Act and are such generous donors to political campaigns. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. A little bit of good news. I'm looking at the latest predicted storm track for Tropical Storm Jose, which will be a hurricane probably Thursday. It is swinging north. The projected path is swinging north toward Bermuda, and hopefully it'll stay out there in the middle of the Atlantic and not come ashore. So there's a little bit of reason for optimism there. We're going to go back to the phones here. James in Atlanta, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, did you have a good vacation?
I had a wonderful vacation. I got caught up on all the little things I had to repair and all the little backlog of letter writing and everything. And Claire and I we had a real good time. We just stayed away from everything, which is, it was a nice rest. I could probably use another week off, but we're back at it.
Yeah, to get hit every day with so much news is probably tough to go through. I wanted to ask you if you heard about Mike Lindell was donating a bunch of pillows to the hurricane.
Who donated the pillows?
The My Pillow guy.
No, I hadn't. I'm familiar with the pillow and everything. I hadn't heard that he donated the pillows, but good for him for doing that. We're seeing a lot of people are coming on out and saying, this is all we've got, but we're going to send it on down.
The point I wanted to make was that he's been public. He had a real bad drug addiction. He's had to overcome a lot, and he is a Christian, and they just want to get the point out that people should never give up. They can always find something with their life to be of some kind of service.
Absolutely.
But that's all I wanted to share, and I really enjoy your show, and I hope you have a great day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Same to you. We're going to switch over to Captain Jack in Florida. Aloha, Captain Jack. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I'm the guy broadcasting your signal out. Yeah, I'm a retired tugboat captain here in North Florida, and I still trip. When somebody needs a captain, I go. But anyway, what I wanted to tell you was I worked both Tampa Harbor and Fort Lauderdale Harbor. And the ships and tugs that come into both harbors, most of them come from Houston. And there hasn't been hardly any come in. And now there's not going to be any come in. If this hurricane hits Tampa, I mean, there's not going to be gasoline on the West Coast. And if it comes on over to Fort Lauderdale, there's not going to be gasoline on the West Coast, or on the East Coast, I'm sorry. But there's going to be a big problem here in Florida on fuel.
Yeah, that's nasty. Apparently that...
Most of us... I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Most of it's coming out of Houston now, which is not being delivered because they're not loading anything out over in Houston.
Well, like I said, some of the refineries are still shut down. Some of the pipelines are still broken. They were saying it was going to be at least a week, possibly 10 days before they were going to start getting any kind of product being moved. And, of course, Irma's going to be there in the next few days.
Right, yeah. I'm in Northwest Florida, and I hope it doesn't hit up here. But anyway, just thought I'd let you in on that.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot, Captain. Good luck. We're going to let you go here and do a station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. I'm checking in on the Tropical Depression 13. That's the one that's forming over in the southwest of the Gulf of Mexico. And that predicted course track is basically indicating right now it's going to stay there. So there's more good news there. So all we really have to do is deal with Irma, and then hopefully those poor people in the Florida, Louisiana, Texas area are going to be in the clear, at least for a little while to come here. All righty, now then, getting on back to the economic news here. Safe Haven Gold has gone up to $1,338 per ounce, while the U.S. is out there warning of massive military response to, well, whoever is out there, that they're fighting with here. All right, let's take a phone call. Roxanne in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
You're on the air.
Yes. Okay, I just want to give you some updates on the gasoline situation. Our railroad commissioner, he's in charge of oil and gas, and he came out last week and he said Dallas started this rumor about the gas shortage, and then it spread to Austin, San Antonio, and he's not very happy about that. But he went on to say that in the U.S. there are 239 million barrels of gas in warehouses and whatnot. The U.S. produces 18 million barrels of gas a day. Texas produces 9 of those. And due to the plant closures here, we're only producing 6 million a day. So, and then our pipeline from Texas to Oklahoma, they reverse the flow. So it's pretty much a big, I think it's a scam, and that's what they're saying, the people in charge are saying, but that media wants people to be in fear and all of that. So.
Well, my understanding is that they've released quite a bit of oil from the strategic reserve, and obviously that indicates that there is a shortage somewhere.
Well, I don't know. The railroad commissioner was quite adamant about what's going on, and there is no shortage. But things can change overnight sometimes. But that was last Thursday or Friday, I believe. He came out with that press conference.
Okay.
And I've got, and as far as, I've always driven into hurricanes because I worked hospital, so I have no fear about that. But you have to be careful because it is a volatile, dangerous situation. And if you want to, it's a site, a website that if people are interested in donating whatever, because there's pets, all kinds of, from food banks but there's no Red Cross, so that's why I trust this site. Do you want me to give it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's called Houstonia, MAG. So that's HOUSTONIA, and it lists maybe 20 different resources to send whatever, money or whatever.
Okay,
and
I'm looking at it right now. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Well, have a good evening.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and the phone lines are open right now. Getting on back to the economic news, obviously with the Labor Day weekend, summer is officially over, all the more so because it does seem like we have another early and hard winter coming on in. But from the business point of view, looking back over the last summer, summer's supposed to be the big season for Hollywood movies. People get out to go to the theaters and so forth and so on. And apparently this last summer rather, was the worst box office for Hollywood in the last 25 years. And they're saying if you factor in the rate of inflation, the numbers are even worse. Now, studio executives will likely blame content pirates and say they're killing the business. But the fact is that people do not have money to go to movies, and modern value-engineered theaters are not the pleasant experience they once were. In fact, Claire and I can't go to a movie theater. The seats are so bad, she can't sit in them for 90 minutes. And then when you add to that, the political correcting of Hollywood has resulted in the most creative and independent thinkers being driven out of the industry. And so Hollywood has fallen back on endless remakes and sequels, and let's take a comic book and make a movie out of it, with very few truly original films being made this day. Now, one needs to remember the lesson of the original Star Trek series, which, by the way, the BBC is running it. They've taken the negatives. They've telecinied them at high def. They've added new computer animation updates to many of the effects. And so it's looking really good, and it's running on the BBC America channel here. Now, obviously, compared to today's modern spin-offs of Star Trek, the production quality of the original series is quite primitive. But what made that show a huge success among young people were the scripts that openly challenged the social conventions of the day. This was a show that made people think about the society they lived in. And Gene Roddenberry understood that moving the setting for controversial stories to outer space made them politically safe for at least the 3 years the original series ran. Star Trek was famous for TV's first interracial kiss, for example. Now today, much of Hollywood is cowed by our government and Israel's government and corporate interest, and as a result, dares not step out of line with the establishment, hence an endless series of video game-esque movies being produced, and after a while, those get pretty tiring. Now, ironically enough, Hollywood's lack of spine has allowed television to actually take the lead in producing original, thought-provoking shows that keep people in their homes and out of theaters. Shows like The Game of Thrones, The Borgias, and Westworld. I'm still in withdrawal over that one, waiting for the next season. There's some really good stuff coming out of these cable TV companies. And there are a few flops as well, but that's basically the essence of show business. But much of what's coming out of Hollywood, it's just regurgitated pap because all the original thinkers are gone. And by the way, Hollywood went through the same thing during the McCarthy era, when the commie witch hunts were targeting some of the best minds, the most creative writers, and driving them out of the industry. And what was left were just these people who would do what the government told them to do. Yes, we'll demonize the Russians. We'll push the propaganda. And that was not exactly Hollywood's golden age. And Hollywood needs to remember the lesson of that time. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. The retail apocalypse is about to claim another victim. This is Neiman Marcus, and frankly, I'm not surprised. I mean, Neiman Marcus is a great place, but they cater to the high end. They cater to the upper middle class, and the upper middle class is vanishing. They're becoming an endangered species. And so, like other stores like Sears and so many of the others, they're trying to lower their demographic. They're carrying cheaper products, and of course that alienates their existing customer base who go into Neiman Marcus expecting to find something that's a little cut above, something that their neighbors don't have. And it's vanity and so forth and so on. I remember many, many years ago when I was working in Hollywood, and my mother was dealing with her cancer, and I was working at 20th Century Fox, and on my way home once a week, I'd stop by the Neiman Marcus right there in Beverly Hills, and I'd just get a little box of Godiva chocolates, because that's all I could afford. And I would take them home to my mother. And I found out after a while that the big thrill for her was not the Godiva chocolates, which were very good. It's that she got to use that Neiman Marcus bag to put her lunch in when she was going about and doing what her things, and that was like the big thrill for her. Okay. Another article on the de-dollarization accelerating. China readies yuan price crude oil benchmark backed by gold. That is a major, major event. So let's turn to immigration and Brexit and the rest of it. The European Union has dismissed the Hungarian request for solidarity over border controls, saying we won't support fences. And last Thursday, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban sent a letter to Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker asking for 400 million euros, representing half the amount that the Visegrad nation says it spent on border protection measures, which include erecting a 110-mile fence along the border with Serbia and another with Croatia. But a spokesman for the Commission refused the request, telling Hungary fences are not something Brussels is prepared to back. They will secure the external common border, but they still want the internal member nations to not have any border controls whatsoever, even though many of these nations are now suffering tremendous hardship from the out-of-control refugee crisis. Now, Peter Mandelson is pledging serious political trench warfare against a potential Brexit bill. And apparently they're back to saying there has to be a second referendum, and yes, we tried to cheat the first one and we failed. We need a second referendum, and we're going to cheat twice as hard to keep Great Britain enslaved to the European Union. Meanwhile, Angela Merkel has apparently reversed her previous position regarding Turkey joining the European Union and is now saying she will work to prevent it. That's not unrealistic when you look at Turkey's recent behavior, where they're acting like the loose cannon on deck. They're clearly pivoting away from Western interests. And so I think it would be indeed be very, very reckless for Turkey to be made part of the European Union. Now, the Rutherford Institute is challenging the expansion of government speech doctrine and disputes the claim that First Amendment doesn't apply to highway rest areas. What the federal government is trying to do is say that free speech is limited in where it can take place. Remember the free speech zones and how ridiculous that was? You can't protest in front of these buildings. We're going to set up this little fenced area over there, and you can go scream your head off all you want. But apparently the Rutherford Institute has asked the U.S. Supreme Court to reverse a lower court ruling that puts highway rest areas off limits for First Amendment activities. And apparently it's asking the Supreme Court to review the case of Vista Graphics versus Virginia Department of Transportation, which allows the Virginia Department of Transportation to restrict the content of privately authored, illustrated, printed, and funded travel guides distributed at highway rest areas and welcome centers. In other words, the highway rest areas, the maps and everything there, have to be government approved, probably to try and boost tourism. Now, very often, we certainly see here on the internet that there are guides that are out there saying that you probably want to stay away from certain places of business because the food is bad, the service is lousy, and now those businesses are trying to fight back against freedom of expression, saying it represents a restraint of trade, that they have a right to do lousy business and not be called on it, which is another indicator we're living in a fascist economic dictatorship. As I mentioned earlier in the show, San Diego is dealing with a major health emergency. In fact, they declared a health emergency to combat hepatitis A outbreak. Apparently, this thing just exploded out of nowhere. Apparently, it started within the homeless population, and it has killed 15 people. 400 people have been hospitalized. And they're trying to basically wash down the areas where the homeless are. The question is, who is patient zero and where did they come from? Because remember, that open borders policy, we have refugees and illegal immigrants coming into this country who are not being given a medical examination. And all of a sudden, diseases that had been eradicated or were under control in this country are now exploding all across the nation. We've even had cases of bubonic plague in the United States. The Black Death. Tuberculosis is back. I remember when I was a kid, tuberculosis was the big killer. And then it was eradicated. They actually cured one. Now it's back. Which I guess is a good boost for business, for tuberculosis treatments. Speaking of treatments, article coming out of Zero Hedge, and it's having to do with a public health crisis that is now estimated to cost the United States $150 billion a year. And basically they're talking about the obesity epidemic. And obesity does, in fact, lead to other health conditions that require treatment. And it's estimated that the obesity epidemic is costing the U.S. $150 billion a year. Now, here's the problem. It's not the fault of the American people that they are obese. We are being fed food that is dosed with chemicals that make us want to eat more. It's not a lifestyle choice. A lot of people are asking me, how did I manage to lose all the weight that I lost these last 2 years? I simply avoided monosodium glutamate, high fructose corn syrup, aspartame, and hormone-treated meat and poultry. That's basically it. Now, monosodium glutamate, the food manufacturers love it. It's billed as a flavor enhancer, but what it actually does is it interferes with the signal in the brain that says, I have had enough to eat. Now, when scientists want to do obesity studies on rats, they have to dose the rat food with monosodium glutamate. Otherwise, the rats won't eat enough to get fat. Rats naturally stop eating when they've had enough to eat to sustain their metabolism. If you want to make a fat rat, you've got to soak the food in monosodium glutamate, and they'll just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat, and they'll get fat, and you can do your studies. Now, aspartame is sold as an artificial sweetener, makes you crave carbohydrates, and now they're discovering it too also interferes with that message to the brain that says, I have had enough. We have meat and poultry that are injected with these growth hormones to make them grow big and huge and produce more product. And the problem is, if those animals are harvested and there's any of those hormones unmetabolized in their flesh and you eat that, it affects you the way it affects the animals. No other country has the obesity epidemic that the United States does. And the difference is the processed, adulterated foods we are all eating. And if they really want to save that $150 billion a year, the CDC needs to look at that issue. They probably won't, for the same reason that they don't look at GMOs or vaccine contaminants. The industry lobbyists are going to be over there saying, no, don't look at MSG, don't look at aspartame, don't look at high fructose corn syrup, don't look at any of those chemicals. They're fine, they're perfectly safe. It's lifestyle choices. Now, as I mentioned before, we're seeing indications of an early and hard winter. And this year has been very hard for poor old Al Gore because he had his movie out this summer, The Inconvenient Sequel. It tanked at the box office. It was a box office bomb. They didn't even get back their original production budget. Now, along with the movie, Al Gore put out a book about the Inconvenient Sequel to just keep selling the gospel of human-caused global warming. It's also not selling very well. In fact, it's actually being outsold on Amazon Kindle by an ebook that debunks the claims made in an Inconvenient Sequel. Meanwhile, NASA, NOAA, GISS, and IPCC are finally being persuaded to release their raw data. And the data is showing that there's nothing unusual at all about current temperatures. This is what we're supposed to be getting. We're not unusually warm. In fact, if anything, we are, in fact, cooling. We're going into a new Maunder minimum here. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, do you remember a gentleman by the name of Haddow about 2 weeks ago announced that he and his crew were going to sail 2 50-foot yachts to the North Pole to demonstrate how much open water there is up there instead of sea ice. And it was going to be the first time anybody had actually sailed to the North Pole under sail. Well, 15 days in, and they had to turn back because they met solid ice. Imagine my shock. We've seen so many of these. They go down to the Antarctic or the Arctic. We're going to document that it's all melting, and then they get stuck in the ice, so they have to turn back here. All right, let's see. We're going to grab a phone call. Al in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. As usual, I was around listening to Dustin in New Jersey. I loved what he said about throwing socks at the enemy. It's a beautiful thing. I sent you an email, and what it is it's supposed to be, some kind of historical database where you can go back a month or two anywhere, in Canada. I'm not sure about the rest of the world, I suppose, and find out what the actual temperature was. And, what the historic temperature was. So, apparently, they're growing bananas, I think, in British Columbia or Vancouver in Canada. No, it's a lie, because if you go even further south in Seattle, it's been, actually a very cold summer, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. I'm looking at the page you sent me right now.
Yeah, so, a couple of days are warmer. A lot of the days are cooler. And if, we're going through this global warming thing, shouldn't it be, a lot warmer than 25 Celsius?
Well, what the global warming people always say is, well, yes, it's cold where you are, but trust us, everywhere else it's just scorching hot, and they love to go on out there and find, one place on the entire planet that's got like a 120-degree temperature, and they love to go to those airport weather stations because they can get really high temperatures there because those weather stations are right in the middle of the runways, with all these jets belching out burning kerosene. So, of course, it's going to be very, very hot in that area. And what they don't mention is that over this last year especially, the total number of days where there were temperatures over 100 is considerably less than it was just a few years ago.
I mean, it would make sense to me that would happen if, in fact, CO2 causes this insulation factor where the energy from the sun hits our planet, and it has a harder time, being reflected back because CO2 is holding it in. But anyway, it's just another testament to the fact that there is no economic growth happening on this planet, really. They can paper it over as much as they want, and it's still not going to work. Because all the money's going right to the top. People like you and me, we're not spending it because we don't have it.
Yes.
And we're the majority. So, it's just more nonsense. And it expands on the previous nonsense, and it just goes on and on and on into infinity, how these guys get away with this crap. And some people suck it up. I don't understand it. It eludes me.
Unfortunately, that's a consequence of the dumbing down of our society, is people don't have the knowledge and skills to recognize when they're being lied to. These days, all in education is being able to memorize what you're told to memorize and think that that somehow makes you smarter than everybody else around you. But certainly, at some point, you can't go on concentrating and scamming all the money up to the top of the system until it all starts to break down. And that's when, that's when things are going to really fall apart. And we're getting close to that. There's no question about that. Anyway, Al, we're going to let you go, take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And this story just came across my desk. This is from Sputnik News. Apparently, Newsweek, which doesn't have a paper magazine anymore, it's strictly online, they're running a story now claiming that the Tsarnaev brothers, who are accused of being responsible for the Boston Marathon terror attack, were operating on behalf of Moscow. In other words, Newsweek is now claiming Russia orchestrated the Boston Marathon bombing, even though Russian security agencies tipped off the FBI and CIA that Tamerlan Tsarnaev and his mother represented imminent security risks. And of course, we know the Tsarnaev brothers didn't do the bombing anyway, because the bombs were in these black backpacks with this little white square patch on top. And the photos of the Tsarnaev brothers in the area of the Boston bombing show them carrying a white and gray backpack. But so Newsweek is now out here saying, see, it was the Russians. The Russians did it. We've got to hate the Russians. I mean, they're really cranking it up. I haven't seen this much abuse of the public trust by the corporate media since way back, again, going back to the McCarthy era, the red baiting era. You know, there's a commie under your bed. There's a commie in your bedroom closet. It's ridiculous here. Do they really think we can win a war against Russia? Especially if China comes in on the other side? It's not going to happen, even if it goes nuclear. All right, let's grab a phone call. Bill in Wyoming, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Well, there's a story on a website called fireaviation.com that says that your air tanker flew on Tuesday, fighting a fire up by Oroville, California.
You mean the 747, they finally let it into the air?
Well, it wasn't a matter of letting it in the air. It's a matter of getting it in the air because of all of the silliness, apparently, with permitting and such.
Well, I'm sure glad they got that thing going because they really need it. I mean, because the airplane is at
it's been all over the world. It's been all over the world. The problem is they haven't been able to get it permitted and insured and contracted and all of that silliness in this country for years and years and years. And then on the Telegraph website over in the UK, there's a story about Typhoon Haiku slamming into Shanghai and China's east coast.
Okay.
That's the first thing I've heard about a typhoon anywhere. Why is this not making it even onto our alternative news over here?
Well, I'll be very honest, it's the first that I've heard of it, and unfortunately, like most Americans, I tend to focus on what's going on with the United States and the various wars. But we know it's monsoon season over there. It's been very, very difficult. We did hear back from our friend who's over there in Nepal right now, and she's safe. But yeah, they get some nasty ones over there.
And you have probably what has to be the most apocryphal email address that I have ever encountered in my life for a talk radio show.
Okay.
I'm told it's WRH@whatreallyhappened.com. Is that correct?
That's my email address at the website.
Okay, I would have sent you the URLs for both of those stories rather than calling you, but I couldn't find the URL or the email address.
Well, I'll take a look for them after the show is over. That typhoon does deserve some coverage. We did report on the monsoons in Nepal, though.
Okay, very good. Have a fine day.
All right, thanks an awful lot. You do need to understand, Claire and I disconnected from the web starting Friday morning last. And yes, we did promote and do a little work on the web through the weekend here, but mostly we just kind of stayed away. So we're still getting back up to speed on what's going on in the world today. Now, let us talk about the growing political backlash regarding online censorship by private companies. And it's not even sure if they're acting on behalf of the U.S. government or just private vested political interest. And apparently, politicals of the left have embraced a perfectly symbiotic relationship with the progressive leaders of Silicon Valley. And so you have people like Google's Eric Schmidt, who was very cozy with the Hillary Clinton campaign. They poured millions of dollars of their tech fortunes into Democratic coffers, all the while colluding with elected officials, independent think tanks, and institutions of higher indoctrination to ram the progressive agenda down the throats of the American public, even though we don't want it. And there's a political backlash growing against it. In fact, Google is starting to lose allies across the political spectrum, because it's one thing to engage in very covert attempts at censorship by lowering the priority of certain searches. But when you come on out and you actually block things, you block videos, you literally say, we're not going to show you that, it's becoming a little bit obvious. And so even liberal thinkers are saying they've gone too far, and they're calling attention to themselves. And it is having an effect. DuckDuckGo has seen a massive surge in users following the revelation of Google censorship. In fact, they've doubled their audience base in the last year. And meanwhile, of course, you have users of Facebook are starting to shut their accounts down, going on over to other social media. This is an opportunity for freedom of speech respecting social media platforms to get in on what had been pretty much an established monopoly of Facebook and Google and YouTube. And I think they ought to be brought down, because at this point, I think nobody's going to argue with the fact that social media has become critical infrastructure, critical to our society's functioning. And as communications infrastructure, they should be held to the same standards as telephones or anything else, which is you do not censor speech. Now, opponents of freedom of speech throughout the decades have always argued that freedom of the press, freedom of speech in the First Amendment basically meant newspapers only and public gatherings. And it didn't apply anywhere else. It's even the same argument we're seeing here, where it doesn't apply to roadside rest areas down there in Virginia. But throughout the years, the Supreme Court, as new technologies have come along, the Supreme Court has consistently ruled First Amendment protection of freedom of speech applies to them. When telegraph first came along, same thing. Telephones came along, same thing. Radio, television, and now the internet. And the statists are trying to find some way that they can shut that all down. And there's literally a war out there between those of us who seek the truth and those who want to keep you living in a world of lies. And apparently the founder of the web browser Opera has accused Google of anti-competitive practices, trying to establish a monopoly in both the search and advertising. Shows that they're not able to resist the misuse of power. This is from John Van Techner, who's the CEO of Vivaldi. And basically saying that Google is using their influence and their ability to censor to try and establish a monopoly, which would be in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act. All right, let's grab a phone call. Lenny in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, what's on my mind is the article you just spoke on, the claim that Russia orchestrated the Boston Marathon bombing. Now, what you're witnessing, from my perspective, is the deep DNA neurotic apoplecticness of the deep state, who's really running the country. Even the generals, okay? If you look at the generals in Syria who are helping liberate Syria, they're on the front lines fighting. But these generals here, they want to sit back, recommend something for the military-industrial complex, and then collect their millions or trillions or whatever they're getting out of the cut. But what you're seeing now, even with the Russian embassy in San Francisco, is just a reaction or an overreaction to nothing, that they are out of control, and they're willing to do anything, and I mean anything, to give up their power. What say you?
Well, certainly the military-industrial complex always does well during times of war. They want to use up the old weapons and then soak the American taxpayer for new weapons, even though the new weapons are all junk. And I love that article we were talking about earlier, where they basically have come on out and said the littoral combat ships are basically a disaster. They've never even been used in real combat, and they're saying, well, let's just junk them and go with this new program that we have here. And it's just all about churning more and more money. But if we get into a real shooting war with a major power like Russia and China, we're going to find out that our weapons really aren't working all that well, especially for all the money that's gone into them. But from the point of view, you said it yourself, the generals sit back, they order new weapons, they send them on in. They don't care if they get blown up or not, because they're still going to get their little money from the defense contractors.
Correct. And but what at the first part of my conversation, what we're witnessing, they don't care if they lose against Russia, China. But this is what happens when you have an insane asylum of people running the asylum. Okay, they're totally insane, and they have no sense of direction for what they do. They just want to be on top, no matter what the cost, and no matter what it costs anybody else.
I don't think it qualifies as insanity. They're just sociopathic people. They're in love with the money that they're making. They've got themselves a sweet little deal, and the more they push for war, the more money they're making. And from their point of view, that's a perfectly sane thing to be doing.
Yeah, demonically insane, but insane. All right. I appreciate the call.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Kathleen in Olympia. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Well, it's been preying on my mind since I read about the United States seizing and inspecting the Russian consulate buildings.
Yes.
In San Francisco. Yes. I don't know if you already mentioned that today.
Yes, we did earlier.
Oh, okay. I'm watching you on YouTube. There's a time lag there. So anyway, it was concerning to me. It sounds like they've ramped up the war drums considerably by doing that.
They're trying to provoke Putin into doing something that can be seized on to basically move toward a more militant posture against Russia. Like I said, Newsweek has just come on out and claimed that Russia was ultimately behind the Boston Marathon bombing. And
really?
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. The Newsweek's online version just came on out and said that Tsarnaev brothers were working at the direction of Moscow. And again, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there is a reason for Putin to do something that's stupid.
Yeah. And, there's always wild conspiracies saying, it's really Russia behind the weather weapons causing the hurricanes. And, people speculate. And it's hard, you never know the real behind the scenes, whatever's going on. But
well, what's going on is they're trying to get the American people to hate Russia, hate China, hate North Korea, and they're not really finding anything that's getting them any traction because the American people have just been lied to so many times. We know we've been lied to so many times. We're just not listening anymore.
Mm-hmm. I saw a really cute documentary yesterday called The Haircut by two Australian young guys who actually went to North Korea and got a haircut.
Mm-hmm.
And they, they spent time with North Koreans, and they also interviewed lots of sort of libtard snowflakes in Australia who were so kind of arrogantly proud that they were individuals, and everyone in Korea. They believed some news story saying that everybody in Korea had to get Kim Jong-un's haircut and that it was a law. And so they went to investigate it. It was kind of lighthearted and funny,
Yes.
but also very, very serious, pointing out the propaganda that we're exposed to in the West.
Yeah, that's pretty absurd
So,
propaganda.
anyway.
There was actually apparently somebody who's actually met Kim Jong-un went public saying, he's not a nutcase. He's got a great sense of humor. He's basically a nice guy trying to take care of his country, and apparently just got excoriated. How dare you not see the obvious, that he's insane, that he's a monster. And again, throughout history, when you're going to start a war against another country, you have to demonize the country. You have to demonize everybody living in it. You have to demonize the leadership and make them look like evil incarnate in order to get your own people to go along with saying, well, yeah, I guess it's okay to wipe that country off the face of the earth.
Yeah. Anyway, I love your show. I listen almost every day, but it's always a time lag. I watch you on YouTube hours after. So this is the first time I've been able to call you, but I just wanted to say you have a wonderful show.
Thank you.
And we learn a lot from you. It's amazing how much news you must sift through even when you're not on the air.
Yes.
To be able to present it all so clearly. And anyway, much appreciation, and thanks for taking my call.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here. Now, getting on back to computer news here, apparently there have been data breaches all over the place here. Roughly 4 million records containing the personal details of Time Warner Cable customers, now Spectrum, were discovered stored on an Amazon server without a password last month. And the leaked data included usernames, email addresses, MAC addresses of your devices, device serial numbers, and financial transaction information, although it does not appear that Social Security numbers or credit card information was exposed. I'm not sure I'm ready to just take them at face value that way. And but apparently the leaked records date back to at least 2010. Other databases revealed billing addresses, phone numbers, and other contact info for at least hundreds of thousands of Time Warner Cable subscribers. The servers also contained a slew of internal company records, including SQL database dumps, internal emails, and code containing the credentials to an unknown number of external systems. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before we get back to the computer stuff, I'm looking at the latest course prediction for Hurricane Irma, and it's showing that Sunday it's going to turn northward, and unfortunately it looks like it could conceivably literally go right up the center of Florida itself. So at least it's not aimed at Louisiana and Texas, but again, it's going to be nasty. If you're anywhere in that area, make your preparations now. Apparently, Dr. Ryan Mao is basically saying that, yes, it's going to go right up the very center, slightly east side of the entire state of Florida. So it's going to be nasty. Now then, getting on back to computers. Apparently, thousands of files containing the personal information of U.S. citizens with classified security clearance have been exposed on yet another unsecured Amazon server. The sensitive information of an estimated 9,400 job seekers, mostly military veterans, was stored on an Amazon Web Services S3 storage server that required no password to access. Way to go, Amazon. Really, really good job. Now, if you have an account on Taringa, which is known as the Latin American Reddit, your account details may have been compromised in a massive data breach that leaked login details of almost all of its over 28 million users. It's wide open out there. This is a global scandal and disgrace. Now, apparently over in China, there was a man who was selling VPN software, virtual private network software. He's been sentenced to 9 months in prison by a Chinese court. And apparently the concern is the software supplied by the man allowed the public to circumvent China's Great Firewall while allowing information to pass without being spotted by China's net sensors and spies and everything. That's what VPN software will do. So, yeah, they're cracking down there on that stuff. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Apparently somebody did a study on the performance of Apple iPhones, especially when the new iPhones are introduced, and they noticed a dramatic slowdown. And so the indications from this study is that Apple deliberately slows down its older phones so that you will be more inclined to buy the new ones. And I'm not that surprised. There have been allegations that many software companies, when they come out with the newer version of whatever it is they want you to have, will send out a signal that tells your existing installation to just kick on back and be kind of slow about it. Last Friday, there was a 3-mile-wide asteroid that skimmed past the Earth, and they discovered at its closest approach, this asteroid had its own 2 moons that were 1,000 feet across. So, kind of interesting things that were going on out there. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show up there in Vancouver. We'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please stay tuned for John Stadmiller's show. He's got a bunch of interesting guests to share with you. And please take what you learn here and on the website, share it with everybody that you know. We still need to push back against this tsunami of deception in which we find ourselves. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.